Welcome to the Hope for Parents with Struggling Teens podcast. I'm Brandon Jaffe. Join us as we explore relationship and mental health issues by weeding out the trends in the mental health industry to uncover what truly works in improving our emotional well-being and relationships. At Inspired Resolutions Counseling, we specialize in providing interventions and resources for families with teens, focusing on topics such as teen mental health, parenting challenges, and family dynamics.
This episode is a recording of the Hope for Parents with Struggling Teens group. The voices of the participants have been edited out for confidentiality purposes.
I really want you thinking about the cycles of your relationship with your kids, the cycles that they have in their life. And a lot of therapists and advice out there is giving you quick fixes so that you can get through or fix that issue. And a lot of these cycles are not going to be fixed. In the long run, we hope that they go away and that they ebb and don't flow back. But a lot of this stuff are habits and things that who needs to focus on? Children, right? I can't do the work for my child. What I can do is be prepared, decide who I want to be, decide what resources I'm going to give, decide how I'm going to walk alongside my child, decide am I going to enable, am I not going to enable, decide what patterns are healthy, what aren't healthy, how am I going to take care of myself and my 6 pillars. These cycles are really important to pay attention to. When we pay attention to the cycles in our life, we actually have a greater chance of overcoming whatever the problem is. We can see patterns in almost every problem in our life. Every once in a while, there's that big crisis that comes out of nowhere. But a lot of the things that we end up getting help for are a result of some patterned behavior. And then it comes to a head. It bubbles up and becomes a crisis. Can anybody think of patterns in their life that maybe they need to not just be aware of, but almost come to terms with? We're going to call that the cycle of why. She keeps getting sucked into the argument of, well, why do we have this boundary? Why is there this rule? Why are you doing that? Why can't I do this? Why can't I do that? There's a cycle and a consistency. That's a pattern for most of you. Raise your hand if you've ever experienced the yeah, but why pattern. Almost all of you just raise your hand. Now tell me if I'm right in terms of what that cycle looks like. You say no to something, or you insist on your child doing something, or you set a boundary that they don't really like, and then they kind of are going, yeah, I'm not going to give you power over this. And then you get into it a little bit with them. And then their big reason is, okay, but why? And then in your mind, you're like, maybe if I can give them a really good why, they'll understand. Because they're saying, well, why, as though they're having a conversation with you. And then your next part of the cycle is you very grumpily say, well, this is why, and you know this. I've said this to you a million times. And then they go, yeah, but that doesn't make sense. Why? Like, why? And then you feel like you're going nuts, and you go, am I speaking another language? And there's nothing that you can explain. There's no formula of words that you can put together to get them to say, oh, now I understood why. You know what, Mom? Know what, Dad? The problem with me being defiant right now was that I didn't understand the why. Now that I understand the why, I feel good about it. We're on the same page. I love you. You know what? Is there anything else I can do for you while I'm outside taking care of that? Can I wash your car? Right? That's not how it goes down. And so that cycle of, yeah, but why, is a trap. Give me some examples of things that they'll say why to. Why do I have to stop playing video games? Why do I have to clean up the kitchen? It wasn't all my stuff. Why do I have to go to bed? Why do I have to get up right now? Why do I have to do my homework right now? I'm going to get it done. Why do you care when I do it, right? It's between me and the teacher. And you know, well, it's because you're not going to do it. And we know that you're procrastinating, and we know that I'm going to suffer the wrath of your frantic decision to not do your homework. I don't think that you can come up with a why, something that your child asks why to, that is them actually trying to understand better. If your child doesn't understand and they ask why, please explain it to them. But if they don't understand yet as a teenager why they should do chores, why they need to do their homework, why they need to go to bed on time, and why they need to wake up on time, or at least why you want them to do these things, then they don't belong at Inspired Resolutions. They don't belong at an IOP. They have a serious learning disability, and we need to get them some help. Now, when I put it like that so flippantly, I'm hoping it'll trigger you to remember my flippant comment about if they need to ask why on this thing, then they don't belong in the grade that they're in. They don't belong at school. They need some serious extra care, like they need to go back to the first grade, maybe even kindergarten. Now, when you think of it that way, what I'm hoping is not that you start putting your child down and argue more. What I'm hoping is you can see the silliness in their question of why. Their why actually means, ugh, I don't want to. Oh my gosh, you're ridiculous. I don't agree with you, Mom and Dad. They know why, they just don't agree with you, and they don't hold value in that thing that you're expecting them to do. What do parents follow that up with? What do we like to say to try to convince them? It's usually the same thing. Can anybody think? You're telling yourself that you're just expecting these things of them because you want them to be successful and happy later on. That's the jump. You're trying to convince them that you're actually having them do chores and the homework that they know they don't really need to do because they can get the teacher to extend the time. You're actually trying to convince them that this silly thing that's inconvenient for them is going to make them happier later on. Some of you are so unhappy right now that they're going, yeah, right. No way. There's no buy-in for me. And so what we want to do is we want to increase our influence through all those ways that we know we can influence them in the long run. But I want you to have those expectations. I want you to set boundaries. I want you to have them do chores. I want you to mention, hey, we do our homework in here on time. But what don't we do? What extent do we not take it to? Arguing. We don't have insane conversations about it. Some of you really have bought into this idea of you got to keep responding to your children. They might flip out, they might hate you in that moment, but continuing the conversation is what brings the insanity. You can let them feel insane because you aren't going to respond. They are not going to agree with you. What's another pattern? Another pattern you recognize, something that you want to break free of. Okay, so that would fall into the why category. That's a specific example of a why question. I want to sleep over at my friend's house. No, why? Oh, I've already gone through this. And so that cycle you break by not participating in it. You set boundaries and you stop participating in the why question. I'm going to bring up a cycle that I think a lot of families can identify with. It's one that involves either parent, whether you're together or not together, and that's the cycle of splitting, where the child kind of splits the parents, or you have two parents, together or not together, who are not on the same page and kind of have different expectations, different values or morals or whatever it might be. And so what that cycle looks like is one of the parents is setting the boundaries, following through with the boundaries, following through with the punishment. Then the child gets frustrated. Then the child and the other parent kind of come together. And then there's passive aggressiveness, both on the child and the second parent's part. And then the parent who is we'll call them the enforcer, enforces even harder, becomes even more resentful of the other parent. And then they get mad at them, things blow up. Then things calm down, then it starts again. It's both parents' fault. There's nothing for your child to stop. That is your fault. Now, that dynamic where we have one parent who is, quote unquote, the enforcer and one parent who's more lax. There's either a lack of communication going on, there's a difference of morals and values going on, or some other issue. And if you can't come together as a couple and talk about the root, which is what are the morals and values that we're actually enforcing, without arguing, then it's time to ask for help. You are not going to figure that out alone. Okay? I can't tell you how often I have split couples come in saying that kind of the beginning of the end for them was this difference and it's the resentful parent usually that seeks me out. I'm so resentful because I was the one who had to enforce. I'm so resentful because I had to do all the parenting. I'm so resentful because I couldn't even get them to follow through with this, and this. and they said that they would, and then they wouldn't, and then they were against me, and I did all the work, and I'm the one who's attacked by the kids. And if you're identifying with that, know that you're not alone, number one. Number two, it's time to ask for help. And so a part of stopping that cycle is thinking about, number one, what is important, what do I have control over, and what are my boundaries? When I'm relying on trying to control things, set rules and punishment and reward, I get frustrated and I don't have much control, even though I feel like I should have control. And then I start acting out, even though I don't realize it. I start focusing more on punishment and teaching lessons than I do on the relationship. Even if the parent who doesn't do any of the parenting is wrong, they're focusing on the relationship. They become more influential than you. This is kind of like a fine line, because some parents are going, yeah, but if I don't parent, they're not going to get any parenting. I got to do something. It's a matter of putting the relationship first. I'm not saying throw all the parenting out the window. Bring it back down to kind of a healthier level. How can I rely on the boundaries that I actually have control over? Not how can I have boundaries that I can't have unless I get a buy-in from my partner or my ex-partner. A lot of breaking unhealthy cycles in our life cannot happen until we accept the truth of what is. What is actually going on? What do I have control over? That becomes hard, because if I'm working with somebody and I'm saying, hey, what do you have control over? A lot of times, if we're talking about breaking an unhealthy cycle, what they're hearing me say is, what part did you play? And then that translates to, what are you doing wrong? And I don't say, what are you doing wrong? But that's what my clients hear a lot of times. It doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. It's just that within that cycle, you are not influential. And accepting that, knowing that, and putting one foot in front of the other, and figuring out where you can focus on what you control is going to be just so monumental. Welcome. This is your first time to group. Do you want to tell everybody who you are and what brought you here? I'm really glad she brought this up. I want my child to be able to come to me. And when I ask parents to clarify that, they usually say something like, oh, like if they have a problem. I want to be really open-minded. And I get it. I want my kid to come to me too. But there are going to be some things that my child doesn't come to me, especially by the time she is a teenager. If I'm going to behave in an enabling way or an unhealthy way in order to get my child to talk to me about everything, that's a problem. We practice healthy relationship, period. And there are some basics for healthy relationship. You guys can make the decision about what boundaries you want to set. You can make the decision about whether you want to be more permissive about them going out and coming back and how they do schoolwork. So all of that stuff has to do with values that your family and you hold and morals. And I don't step on the toes of that. There's some basics to health. Like, I'm going to set boundaries and follow through consistently, even if you are angry with me. I'm not going to change my boundaries trying to make it so that you're not angry with me. And if I have an issue with you lecturing me because I'm telling you to do something in this home, I don't think that you become an unsafe parent. And that's what I call you parents whose kids are willing to talk to you. You're a safe parent. I don't think that you're going to disrupt that dynamic you have where you're a safe parent to talk to in crisis and when things are difficult or when things are really happy and joyful, just because you set a boundary or just because you say, hey, you know what, I don't like being lectured by you. I'm going to step out of the room when you start lecturing me in this way. I've never seen a situation where that made you unsafe and all of a sudden the child goes, oh, that's it, I'm never talking to you about anything. What disrupts the dynamic of being a safe parent is they come to you with something difficult and instantly you go, okay, well, you're in trouble now, or instantly you start judging them, or instantly you don't even hear them out and you start talking over them and giving them advice when they just wanted to be heard. What makes you an unsafe parent is when you nag instead of having boundaries that you just follow through with. What makes you an unsafe parent is when you're explosive and you yell. And I could go on and on. There are things that make you a safe parent and things that make you a not safe parent. Now, here's the thing. None of you are totally safe. If I'm a teenager and I come to my mother who has conservative values and I say, hey, look, Mom, I want to talk and I don't want you to get mad at me. Can I talk to you? And she says, oh yes, Brandon, you can tell me anything. And I go, okay, here's the thing. There's this smoking hot girl who loves to smoke weed and do cocaine. She's not going to date me unless I smoke weed and do cocaine with her. So we're going to have sex tomorrow night. I need you out of the house. And what do you think I should cook her tomorrow? Like, can you go get some of that pasta? Right, I know I'm being ridiculous. But I'm sorry, but if your children are making some of those bad decisions, you aren't going to be the safe parent to talk to. Now, here's another thing. I want your children talking to you, and as they get older, I want them talking to you even more. But if you are the only one that they talk to and they have not figured out a social life, they need some help building other resources other than you. I ran into this recently in a session with somebody where the parents had this horrible epiphany. They love their kids dearly, but they had set up a dynamic where they were their kids' entire social life. They only talked to them, and some of the things they were talking to them about, the parents didn't want anything to do with right now. And they had created a situation where they had kind of made it difficult for these kids to figure out their own social life. And so that's what we're working on. We're working on helping this family kind of create a different social life right now. And it's called enmeshed in psychological terms. So when a family becomes too enmeshed, they don't have separate lives. They can't operate and be independent of each other. And sometimes in the goodness of parents' heart, they want the good side of that, but they want their kids to not have problems or make bad decisions while they become the safe parent. My point being, especially for you, is don't go doing something unhealthy because you desire to not disrupt the fact that you guys can talk. I don't think you're going to disrupt that. And your goal is to teach them to have that in you and have that in others. Now, she's being lectured. Anybody get lectured by your child? Isn't that a funny dynamic? When your children turn around and lecture you, what are some of the things that you get lectured on? When one child lectures you about the other difficult child and parenting them, this becomes a challenge in and of itself. Because we do want to hear and let the children who are experiencing something difficult from a difficult child, we want to hear their voice. But there's a difference between hearing them out and having a difficult conversation about what they're experiencing in the family and it turning into them lecturing you. If they're saying the same thing over and over again, it's time to say, hey, I hear everything you have to say. In fact, I've written it down. And write it down. I've written it down. I might not be ready or able to do what you want me to do. I don't even know that, what's healthy and what's not, but I hear you. And then once you have made sure that you validate that you hear them, you can say, hey, this is a conversation I'm not willing to have. I have all the information you've given me. That's that disengaging instead of just ignoring. Now, you don't say that over and over and over again. At some point, it might just be a quick, hey, I got to step out of this conversation. I love you, but I can't have it. Now, that dynamic is so common. And I've seen it go both ways. I've seen it where what the child is telling the parents is so much healthier than what the parent's doing, but it's still not their role. If you are doing something unhealthy with one child and aren't able to change it, it's better that you voice that than them build resentment towards you. There's a lot of letting go that can happen because somebody acknowledges, hey, I'm stuck here. I hear you and I'm stuck. I'm having a hard time doing what's healthy right now. And then again, you only participate in that conversation for so long, and then you've got to let it go. You can't participate because it is not their role. Not that they might not be right. It's not their role. I've done a lot of therapy with siblings who have to let go of that role. What they're saying is totally right, but it's not their role. It's not healthy for them to focus on that. We don't ever want one child to become the star. Everything's all about them. And that's really hard when you have a struggling child. I appreciate that dynamic. You're not alone in that. Any other examples? Being lectured. What does your child lecture you on? Man, I get feedback on that all the time. Hey, Brandon, you told me to disengage. I disengaged. Now I'm being yelled at and told that I don't listen. And I don't know if you're not listening or, if you should be listening or not. I'm not there. I've worked with parents, they don't disengage. They just simply ignore, and it's kind of like, it's my way or the highway, and what you have to say doesn't matter. And then they'll explain to me, well, this is what they're saying. And I go, okay. And then I ask the child, hey, is this what you're saying? Well, that's all I'm allowed to get out. And then they go on to explain some dynamics, and then it's this aha moment for the whole family because we finally listened to the entire thing. And then there are some parents who've heard it, and they are participating in insanity if they actually have that conversation. Because they did listen to the whole thing. The issue is I'm not agreeing with you, and I'm not going to change my boundaries. And the kids are angry. So I can't tell you if you have actually actively listened to your children. I can tell you that actively listening to them, giving them the feedback, summarizing in a healthy way to them, doesn't make them happy with the result. Just because your child tells you you don't listen doesn't mean you didn't listen. And just because you listen doesn't mean you're going to make your child happy. They want what they want when they want it. And that's that letting go piece. At some point, sometimes with some of these cycles and some of these truths in the parenting dynamic, we've got to let go. We can't expect for them to be happy with us during this season. Who do I want to be and how do I want to walk along my child, even though they are rejecting me consistently, is one of the most important decisions you will ever make in your life as a parent. And I know from your stories, you're being rejected on a daily basis. I know. At some point, when there is so much damage in the relationship, you got to ask yourself, is this a season that I'm wading through? Or is this something that's going to require extra help? Are we at some point going to have to ask somebody to do family work? And that's an important discernment. Because for some of you, you're going through a season and your kids who, and I say this all the time, whose frontal lobes are not connected yet, are really struggling to find independence, but they aren't independent. They have all these things telling them that you've got to be the enemy because you don't understand, but then they need you. And right, it's this really immature season of life for them. A lot of times it's really pushed by the I want what I want when I want it. I want to be independent now, but I don't want to make the sacrifices it would take to actually be independent. And they're wrestling through that, and it's your decision to say, hey, what resources am I going to give them? How am I going to walk alongside them? Where am I going to set boundaries because I don't like their mood and their tone and their attitude towards me? Am I going to take them on the family vacation? Am I going to leave them home when we go to dinner? I don't know. But here's the thing. Sometimes we are taking personally their season of life, and sometimes even though we reject their feedback, like we know we're not crazy, they're the crazy one, we still take that feedback personally, and we become resentful because they are resentful. It's no secret that I'm a Christian, and so I have this really cool relationship that I believe in with God the Father that really outlines this dynamic. Because if during my worst seasons of my life, if God was to give to me what I'm giving to him, or if he were to operate things in the world based on what I think they should be, this world would be a mess. I wouldn't have a relationship with God, and it wouldn't go well, right? That doesn't make sense. Whether you believe in Christianity or not, or you believe in God or not, that whole dynamic kind of speaks to our dynamic with our children. Think about it. They resent you because they're not getting what they want. They're really uncomfortable. You may or may not have caused damage, but they blame you. There's nobody else to blame. They are selfish. They are entitled. They don't have the skills to be independent, but they act like they do, and they act like they're independent. They take advantage of you. And your job is to unconditionally love them and be patient and set boundaries, but wait. I'm so glad in Christianity that we have the New Testament. The New Testament, a relationship with God, it looks totally different. And it's that, hey, look, there's boundaries. I can't just do whatever I want, but there is that dynamic of patience and waiting and unconditional regard and love. I'm going to be here with these boundaries no matter what. You can hate me and I'm not going away. I will not let you into my home if you're unsafe, but I will not do away with my relationship. And so for you, you're getting lectured probably every day, being told that you're crazy, you're not right, you're doing things that are unfair. Why do you even care, right? I implore you, and I hope that this group helps you find the motivation to sit, wait, be consistent, be unconditional in your healthy relationship practices, in your boundaries, in your loving on your child. And that waiting period really kills some parents. Anybody sick and tired of waiting? Statistically, you will not be waiting forever. So that dynamic, a lot of times, parents will realize, oh, wow, I recognize this. I remember going through something like this. And some parents go, I was compliant. I don't know where this is coming from. This is crazy. And that's a really hard thing to deal with. In your story and in your struggles, when did you start feeling like things were changing? She brings up a really good example of something, and that's when your children try to make you feel really, really guilty. And bringing up a parent who's passed away, they would let me. That's like the ultimate kick in the gut. Oh man, they're bringing out all the stops. And it's going to be really easy to become angry about that, become feeling guilty along with anger. It's going to be really easy to allow your child to pull you into insanity when they make drastic things like, you're a terrible parent, I hate you. Oh, do you know how many parents are not like you? The other parents are judging you. Oh, you know what my dad, mother, or my dad, father would think of you right now? Oh my gosh, right? So they make these outrageous claims against you about how horrible you are. Can anybody identify with that? Right? I've got some people putting 2 hands up. And so if you can identify with that, number one, I hope you see you're definitely not alone. Your kids probably aren't going to remember saying that stuff to you. Some of them might, but it just comes out. It's this desperate attempt to get control. They are trying to get independence, and they are trying to get what they want when they want it. Has anybody had your child come at you that strongly and then later on come back and apologize? Those of you who have experienced your kids coming at you and saying horrible things and then later on apologizing, does that usually happen when you disengage, or does it happen when you participate and you get just as angry as them? When you don't participate, you increase the likelihood that they sit with themselves and feel regretful for their actions. When you have the discussion, you say, you can't say that to me, how dare you? And you raise it up and you try to convince them how horrible they're being. What happens is it is no longer just them that has damaged the relationship, even though you were justified. And now they get to lose sight of the damage that they caused. You guys have your frontal lobe hopefully totally intact. And it is easier for you it should be easier for you to remain calm, to not participate, to tell yourself, oh, wow, this is a season, this is a moment, this is insanity that I'm not going to participate in. It should be way easier for you to do that than your children to do that. Now, I teach the same thing to your children when I work with them. If you come to anger management, I teach the same thing to them. But you see, what parents forget is you're literally supposed to be more capable of remaining calm, even when you feel attacked. You are not supposed to take it personally. You are not supposed to damage your end of the relationship because they are totally unfair, unjust, cruel, mean, and hateful. I'm not saying you excuse that. I'm not saying you don't set boundaries. I'm not saying you let them walk all over you. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm just saying you don't participate. And it's mind-blowing how often I hear parents say, man, I know when I finally wasn't participating because I would hear the worst things, and then, would you believe it, my son or my daughter came and apologized to me. They felt really bad. That's never happened before. I have heard that comment over and over and over again when parents stop participating in the temper tantrums and the blow-ups. And what keeps parents from being able to stop that is the belief that they can't be weak, they can't allow their child to walk all over them, and that if they don't participate, they're telling their child that they're right. That isn't what you're saying. Do you mind checking in for us? So something that's working for her right now is framing it as a reward. And I'm cool with that as long as it works. First and foremost, if it works, we keep doing it. And right now that is working. It's still kind of a boundary. Like, if you're not getting your stuff done, there's not extra time for you to be on the electronics. If you're getting it done, there's extra time. And so sometimes it's reminding yourself to set boundaries rather than punishments and rewards. But remember, I am not against punishment and reward until what happens? It stops working and it becomes insanity. And so I love your share because I can hear your attitude behind it. My favorite one is, look, you can't participate in the thing that's going to make you sick if you're not eating. Here's what I expect of you. And it's not I'm going to be angry. It's just I can't participate and I can't give you permission for that. And then you followed it up with giving options. It might be easier for you to get something at school. Eat with your friends. It might be easier if you do it this way. Sometimes the skill that we forget to teach our kids is problem solving and looking at all the options. I think parents in parenting sometimes don't think outside the box. Sometimes we get so honed in on what should be instead of what could be. There's so many options if I want my child to eat. There's so many options in terms of getting certain things done. Parents who get honed in on it's supposed to be this way, you might be missing an opportunity to be influential and to guide your child into doing something that they don't want to do. And so, again, thinking outside the box. Does anybody have any examples of thinking outside the box in parenting? Ooh, I love that one. That's one where I think most people would be like, oh, you can't sleep in your clothes. Why not? Your kids are disgusting high schoolers anyways. Why can't they sleep in their clean clothes? Who cares? It gets them out the door sooner. I was talking to one mother who the biggest fight was getting up and going to school. And somehow we eventually figured out that they were honing in on combing your hair. I will give her, this child had some wild hair, peacock hair. But I was like, why does it matter? Well, you're not supposed to do that. And I get it. Some of us come from like old-fashioned backgrounds, and I get that ideally your kids are combing their hair. But I don't know if you've been on campus. It's like this dude was wearing a uniform and then going to school with peacock hair. This kid socially actually got ahead and was like attracting girls because of his wild hair. It worked for him. And he got up and got out the door in the morning. Thinking outside the box. That is our job. We are the ones who should be good at thinking outside the box while we set boundaries and follow through. I'll give you one that came from my caseload once. It was dishes. Anybody have problems with dishes? Right? Getting the kids to do the dishes? So this one kid said, well, I'll do the dishes if you guys stick them in a bin like at my restaurant. So this kid had become a real expert on dishwashing because he worked in a restaurant. And so what he would do is he would fill that thing up with water, have everybody put it in, and he'd kind of swish it around and get all the gunk off. And then he was willing to put it in the dishwasher. That bin cost like $10. Most of you would pay $10 to get your child to do dishes. And I think it became kind of fun for him because he like had this thing that he was collecting. He took ownership of it. It was really interesting. I'm not saying it would work for everybody, but that again was kind of like, let's think outside the box. One thing that I did want to try to talk about, what are some of the most common mental health issues your kids are dealing with right now? Anxiety, depression, ODD, oppositional defiant disorder, ADHD, OCD, eating disorders. Now, I'm going to address is usually referred to as dysthymia. It's this kind of recurrent depression that doesn't really go away. A lot of times you're not going to find the cause of it. There's no major trauma or major thing that causes it. And the reason I'm bringing that one up is because I've had a couple of cases lately where things were being framed incorrectly. And we as therapists, by the way, right now, we suck. I'm going to admit it for all of us. Psychologists, LCSWs, LMFTs, we are missing the boat completely on diagnosing and helping people figure out what the heck, right? It's like right now, if you ever feel down, you have depression. If you ever feel anxious, you have anxiety. If you can't pay attention, you have ADHD. If you like things in order, you're OCD. It's just, if you have swinging moods, you are bipolar. And so this diagnosis thing is getting out of control. You don't always need a diagnosis to ask for help. In fact, I wish more people would ask for help before the diagnosis. And so this thing that I've run into a couple of times in the last month with different clients is they've been told that they have an anxiety disorder because they become overwhelmed. Being overwhelmed is not the same as having an anxiety disorder. And there is this thing that I think sometimes is getting misdiagnosed, because if I can get to school, I can get things done, but overall I'm just kind of lethargic in a way, but I kind of can do some things, but overall I'm just feeling down most of the time, but not quite down enough like other people who really have major depression, and it happens often. It's going on day in and day out. That's mild recurrent depression. And I think that a lot of people are calling it major depression with anxiety, because when you feel like that, if you're tired all the time and feeling just kind of down, but not down enough to not be able to do things, wouldn't things be overwhelming? And so what I'm realizing is we are mixing up overwhelmed, which would be like, I have too many things to do, or I don't understand the things I need to get done, so I can't get them done. I have a giant to-do list, with anxiety disorder. And so I think it's important that we acknowledge there are some people for varying reasons, especially teens, who just don't feel good. They kind of have this mild depression that isn't major depression, that kind of goes unnoticed, and they become a burden. Their parents get really, really annoyed with them. The parents kind of are like, look, I know you're not majorly depressed because when you do D&D or when you're playing your video games, you're fine, right? And again, we should not treat it like they have major depression. We shouldn't not have any expectations of them. But saying what it is, right? If we call that anxiety disorder and they get on anxiety medicine and they have convinced themselves that they can't do anything because they have an anxiety disorder, we create a whole nother world of problems. If we go, hey, you become overwhelmed when the list of things for you to do isn't overwhelming. There's this recurrent, you want to feel motivated, but you don't feel motivated issue going on. Then what we can do is we can start to take a look at some other things. We can take a look at physical health. A lot of times what's going on has some sort of physical thing going on. Okay, we'll rate it. Not for yourself, right? I don't want to know if this is a 10 for you, because a lot of times you cannot trust your own emotions and your own feelings. I don't want you to trust your feelings, especially if you're asking for help because of your feelings and emotions. And so when I kind of whittle this down for people, I've had a couple, especially in the past few weeks or month, realize, oh my gosh, I don't have an anxiety disorder. I'm not afraid of things. I just feel down a lot of the time. And that treatment plan and addressing that looks much different than somebody who unreasonably feels anxiety because of things. Now, here's where it kind of becomes confusing. But I do feel anxious. Well, you should feel kind of anxious because you haven't gotten anything done the past month. You should feel a little bit burdened because, man, your parents are coming down on you rightfully because you refuse to do anything. And then it becomes, to what extent am I perpetuating the symptoms? And do I have control over patterns that I can change? And to what extent is this something that I can't do anything about? What do you think as a therapist I'm supposed to help people do first? What do I have control over? What can I focus on? What can I eliminate that might be perpetuating the problem? We get a lot of referrals from other people. A lot of people that come in have had therapists before us. When somebody comes in hopeless, major depression, it's a sad diagnosis. The truly major depression is really a hard diagnosis in the beginning to work with. People become desperate to feel better. But a lot of times we're getting things like anxiety, depression, and ADHD. And then as we peel back the layers, we figure out, well, yeah, you're failing out of school. Okay, you feel down. Yeah, your parents are really ticked at you. Okay, you feel down. You've just, broken up with so-and-so and you don't have these friends over here. And that's the other recurrent mild depression case that I was uncovering this past month. And that's some of the feelings were coming from some very specific decisions that weren't being tied together. This particular client had lost a lot of friends because of some certain decisions, but had been to like 3 or 4 therapists before me who had told him, yeah, you have you have depression, you have ADHD, and you have anxiety. He was convinced that he had an anxiety disorder. And I undiagnosed him with everything. And I just said, hey, you've got this kind of like mild depression that is really influencing your lack of motivation. And we can see the steps that you took in your history. I can see the decisions you made, whether it was because of this recurrent depression or because of something else, that led directly to damaging a lot of relationships. I said, it doesn't sound like you've ever tried to make amends. What? What's that? Well, amends, where you acknowledge the damage that you've caused in relationships and you try to make up for it or at least acknowledge it. And that concept was so wild to this person. And they said, I always have felt just kind of this lack of motivation. And a lot of people tell us that. But he said, I can get my schoolwork done. I don't feel as excited as other people do. And that's a sign of something. So a lot of people say, well, it's that big one, like I don't find enjoyment in things I think I should find enjoyment in. But he was able to say, it's never, ever since I turned a certain age, it's kind of just been this recurrent, I like things, but I don't love them. We're working on, number 1, showing gratitude, not just having gratitude, but pretending to be grateful. And this dude act out being grateful, totally being silly. And that act of being silly on a daily basis, he came back and said, man, that's actually kind of helping. I thought you were crazy. And then making amends to the relationships that he damaged and being able to talk to people about this recurrent, just kind of feel down, but I know I'm not super depressed. It's kind of a weird place to be because any in-between place is really hard for people. Of course, this guy had anxiety when he had to go to school. Why did he have anxiety? He had lost a lot of friends at school. Why else did he have an anxious mind? Because he knew he wasn't following through with things, and guess who was coming at him soon? Mom, dad, coach that wanted him to get back on a team. How do we know something is diagnosable? meets the DSM criteria, but at the crux of it, what is the reason that we make a diagnosis? Really, the truth is the DSM was written so that insurance will pay. And that's where we've gone wrong in the mental health institutes. We have allowed both Google and the insurance companies to define everything, and then it's this attempt to get paid and everything. That's the slippery slope that we went down. But really, it's diagnosable because it's getting in the way of something. What's it getting in the way of? Functioning. If my anxiety is the reason that I can't function, then there might be an anxiety disorder. If I have anxiety because I chose to make certain decisions, that's different. There used to be this thing that doesn't really exist in diagnosing anymore, and that's you couldn't put symptoms into multiple categories. And I wish we still looked at things that way. So if I'm an addict, or if I smoke weed every day, and I choose to not go to school until third period, and I'm anxious about being around my parents at home who are frustrated with me, and I'm anxious about being in school, if I'm smoking weed every day, first of all, I'm taking a hallucinogen with paranoid attributes to it. And then on top of it, I'm making decisions that are not going to be accepted by the people who love me around me. And so if I put my anxiety in, I have an anxiety disorder slot, instead of I made some poor decisions I'm using and people are angry with me slot, then I'm going to get misdiagnosed. I'm talking about this because it can be frustrating to try to get help for something that is a misdiagnosis. If I take medication for depression, but I'm not actually depressed, and there's going to be symptoms, and I'm going to be worsening things. If I go into a therapist with my diagnosis, I had a psychologist tell me that I have an anxiety disorder, and I don't actually have an anxiety disorder, there's other things in my life that I need to address, then I'm not going to have the right treatment plan. I want to start this discussion with everybody, every therapist, every parent, every teen, every person that mental health has touched their life. But I want you guys to understand at the beginning of a diagnosis, especially depression, I feel down. Yes, that's a part of it. I feel sad is yes, a part of it. But it's I feel sad down in a way that doesn't make sense. It doesn't match what's going on in my life. And then we have other types of depression, and it is getting in the way of my functioning. Well, somebody who's majorly depressed and completely shuts down and can't function at all, yeah, it's getting away in their functioning. But we're missing the boat sometimes on this recurrent mild depression because people are able to function to an extent, but overall, that down feeling day in and day out is taking its toll. And when I've brought it up to family, said, hey, it kind of seems like it's more of this recurrent mild dysthymic depression, all these bells go off. I know when I've hit it because they go, wait, tell me more about that? Oh my gosh, what? But with that dysthymic and with some of the depression, when you truly start peeling back the layers of depression, the feeling down doesn't fit your circumstances. The feeling down, whether it's mild or severe, is getting in the way of functioning. It's getting in the way of relationships. You can tie it back to the feeling down, and then you have some of the stuff that starts to break away. Then the relationships kind of start to go down. And so when you do it backwards, like, hey, I caused all this chaos in my life, making really poor decisions, or using, or becoming really defiant, or choosing not to go to school, and then I started feeling down because I'm suffering the consequences now, it's really important that we figure out, well, where did this happen? Is your child, or are you just in the middle of suffering the consequences of a bunch of decisions? Was there something else physical that went down? A lot of times parents don't insist on the physical assessments. A handful of times in my career, I've had people come to me and I go, hey, something feels off for me. I'm not a doctor. I really like to see the doctor. They go see the doctor. They go, oh, no, they're just depressed. Okay, they come back to me. Okay, you know what? Can you go to a different doctor because something feels off? There's something that doesn't feel right about this depression. And I can't put my finger on it. We're all practicing, us professionals, we're practicing. And so in my experience, I've told parents before, hey, yes, they're down. I get it. They feel down. But there's some other symptoms that aren't fitting within the mental health diagnosis. And they keep coming up in session. And that's not my wheelhouse. And I've had people go back to different doctors like 5 or 6 times before they realize, oh my gosh, there was an issue. I mean, I've known somebody in my life who at first was diagnosed with anxiety and they actually had a brain tumor. It took like many times going back to get that diagnosis. We want to have this conversation more, I think, about all the diagnoses that we're getting. We want to be a little more diligent, and at the basis of it, we want to ask ourselves that question: can this be explained by other things? Is it the I'm feeling down? Is it the anxiety that's actually getting in the way and causing the damage in life? Or is there an explanation for it elsewhere that needs to be addressed so that we can get a baseline? Sometimes you address it over here so that you can get that baseline. How bad is this anxiety? Any thoughts, you guys? I'd like to hear from a couple of you. So the fact that he's in bed does sound more like a major depressive disorder. When meds are not working, it becomes a little difficult because meds don't work sometimes when you have the wrong diagnosis. Meds don't work because you have the wrong med or the wrong dose. And you've got to be persistent if you've come to the point that medication is a requirement. And there are severe depression. It's kinder to have somebody take that medication. What therapy is doing is it's rewiring your brain. At the end of it, that's what we're trying to help people do. And if I can rewire your brain by you taking meds and getting to a point that you can function. But here's what happens. People will take meds for years and not report correctly to their doctor. It'd be like, yeah, I think that it's kind of, maybe it's working. I don't know. Yeah, I think they said I have ADHD, so I'm pretty sure this stimulant that they've been giving me, like, things should change with medication. There shouldn't be as much guesswork. It shouldn't be like, maybe it's working. It should be like, yeah, you know what? It's not perfect, but there's a significant difference, and now we can do the work in therapy. A lot of times what I like people to think of medication is medication gets you to the point that you can do the therapy with things like anxiety and depression. Some people will have to be on medication their whole lives, but the goal is to rewire the brain. Does that make sense? And what you're saying, so many parents can identify with right now. Their child is smoking regularly, and it's not just the children, People are smoking weed regularly. It is legal. I mean, on the way to my river house, within a mile span, there's literally 4 dispensaries. You drive down the 55, and there's a giant one. And whether you agree with it or don't agree with it, at the end of the day, this is a substance that is heavily affecting dopamine, serotonin, the pleasure center, the hormones in the body that regulate us. I don't care what anybody says. The other issue is this is not a drug that we understand. There is 0 studies on the drug that we are dealing with now. There's tons of studies on the weed from the 70s and 80s, kind of the 90s. But in the 90s, it started getting mutated, right? It's so funny when somebody says, weed is the most natural drug in the world. You want to bet? Weed and soy are the 2 most mutated plants on the face of the planet. There has been more engineering and more messing with weed than almost anything. Soy, corn, and weed have been mutated more than anything. We don't understand, and we do not have studies on what is going to happen and what is going on with the drug we know now as THC. And there's different delivery systems. There are different amounts of it. It is concentrated. It is a totally different drug. And so one of the problems I have with diagnosis is if a doctor diagnoses somebody with ADHD, anxiety, or depression, and that person is smoking weed on a regular basis, I have a major problem with that because that doesn't make sense. Without the sobriety, and then here's what everybody tells me, well, they were like that before. I'm like, really? But you cannot give an accurate diagnosis of depression, anxiety, ADHD when somebody is smoking this THC. And then the other thing I get from people is, well, they're only smoking a little bit. They only smoke like once a week. Well, do you know how many people are lying about how much they smoke? How many people don't know how much THC they're putting in their body? I mean, on a monthly basis, I talk to somebody who everybody around them is convinced that they smoke like once a month and they smoke 3 times a day. And if the people in their lives knew, they'd be blown away because of how high they function. You cannot get an accurate diagnosis, and therapy can help, and it can help with that process of coming to terms with, I am an addict or I am somebody who cannot handle using THC. But what you can't get is an accurate diagnosis. There's no way. Okay? Which means that the treatment plan can't be based on the diagnosis. The treatment plan's got to be based on something else. I hope it maybe helps you seek out the treatment that is going to be more effective for your family. I appreciate you guys, and I will see you next week.
The Hope for Parents with Struggling Teens podcast is an Inspired Resolutions production, hosted by Brandon Jaffe, edited and mixed by Natalie Atkinson, music by Natalie and Sean Atkinson. Inspired Resolutions Counseling is based in Yorba Linda, California. Whether you're interested in joining our group, seeking therapy services, or exploring more of our resources, you can find us on our website, Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube at Inspired Resolutions Counseling.